I've been a big fan of Yamaha for over 40 years. I've been working on the water for over 40 years, and I learned at an early age that was the best product out there. And it was really about reliability. A few times in my life that I've gotten away from it for one reason or the other, I've regretted it, and I've always been happy to come right back to it, and I'm thrilled to have Yamaha as our partner now.
Please welcome back to the stage, Shannon Colbert.
Hi everyone, welcome back. Our next plenary this morning is Decarbonization and the Role of the Ocean. Climate mitigation will require national decarbonization strategies. There's increasing research and investments into a wide array of strategies, including carbon dioxide removal, carbon capture and storage, carbon reduction technologies, and we will need all of these pieces to really look at how we can start to truly reduce emissions across many different sectors and potentially lock carbon into our deep ocean. Our opening plenary, I'd like to welcome our session sponsor, Dr. Rick Murray, Deputy Director and Vice President for Science and Engineering with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. He served as Director for the Division of Ocean Sciences at the National Science Foundation and as co-chair of the Subcommittee on Ocean Science and Technology during both the Obama and the Trump administrations. Dr. Murray.
Greetings, everybody. Hope you had a nice break after this morning's very stimulating session and discussions. On behalf of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, as well as other ocean scientists and engineers, I'm delighted to welcome everyone here to this session on decarbonization. As we know, creating a sustainable, decarbonized economy was going to require participation and cooperation from all levels and all sectors of society, and will also require partnerships across academia, industry, philanthropy, and government. It must also include the participation of those who have not historically been included in ocean science and in the decision-making on which knowledge about the ocean rests. Seeing everybody here today in person and those watching online greatly reaffirms this need for the wide audience, the wide participation across the spectrum. Now, all this increase of research and investments that we're hearing about must increase as part of an expanded view of the blue economy. The term is evolving, the sectors involved are evolving, and this expanded view does not just tally what we take out of the ocean, but it includes investments we make in the ocean and the countless things it does to make society vital and sustainable. And this blue economy must enfranchise all sectors of society and not further the divide between the haves and the have-nots. The goal of this year's CHOW is to explore the ocean-climate connection and how we can make ocean conservation part of climate strategies and nationally determined contributions to assess climate change. Now, it's a daunting task, as we all heard this morning and as we know from our private and professional lives. But fortunately, we have a roadmap in the recently released Ocean Climate Action Plan that was referenced many times this morning. The OCAP provides clear and immediate priorities for federal agencies and leverages the capabilities of non-federal partners that are so necessary to explore and implement climate solutions at scale. We need to no longer just better document the state of the ocean. We need to identify how to come up with climate solutions in a forward-looking way. So the panel today is going to explore critical aspects of decarbonization and how we might manage our global ocean to ensure it thrives for future generations. This is central to combating climate change, protecting the health of coastal communities, and sustaining our economies, both our ocean economies as well as our, terrestrial economies, the economies overall. So Dr. Scott Doney from OSTP will be moderating the discussion. Scott is the Assistant Director for Ocean Climate Science and Policy in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. He has a background in researching and teaching on ocean climate, ecosystems, and the carbon cycle, which I guess is actually, Scott, quite an understatement, actually, in terms of saying you have a background in research and teaching. Anyways, he's also including more than 20 years as both a scientist and graduate student at Woods Hole. Scott has also chaired the committee for the 2022 National Academies report on a research strategy for ocean-based carbon dioxide removal and sequestration. As you saw earlier today, has participated in many government studies and government efforts. And we are all extremely grateful, Scott, for your leadership, both as a scientist and as a policymaker for decades. Scott, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Rick. And it's my great honor today to moderate this panel. Wonderful group of speakers. Mark Huang from Sea Ahead, Courtney Magici from Ocean Visions, and Sarah Cooley from Ocean Conservation. Okay, you'll have to fix that one. The timing of this panel couldn't be better in the sense that the challenges facing us from carbon dioxide rising in the atmosphere were made so obvious last week when two of the sponsors for CHOW, NOAA and UC San Diego, published the latest data from Hawaii, showing that May, the month of May, had the highest levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide that this planet has seen in millions of years. UCSD and NOAA have been monitoring this dating back to the late 1950s. And looking at the ice core records to the present, atmospheric carbon dioxide is now 50% higher than it was before the Industrial Revolution. And just to give a scale for the problem, and then I'll turn it over to the panelists, right now humans emit about 10 billion tons of carbon from fossil fuel combustion primarily, but also from land use. And if we're going to hit any of these climate targets to stabilize our climate at well below 2 degrees Celsius, we needed to be on a pathway where we take 10 billion tons per year of carbon and get that to zero. And that's going to have to happen well before the middle of this century. And so that's the challenge that I'm presenting to the panelists. So I'm going to start by just asking them to each introduce themselves, and Sarah can fix her affiliation, which I messed up. I should know that one. But we'll start with Mark.
Thank you, Scott. So Mark Huang, I'm a co-founder of Sea Ahead. We just had our 5th birthday party last night up in Boston. We are a blue tech venture hub. So what is that? Our view is that what is maybe relatively new to the policymakers and the science, such as Woods Hole, is this concept of entrepreneurship, mostly STEM-based, tied to ocean sustainability. We've seen that in renewable energy. We've seen that in vehicles going to electric. We've seen that in food, more sustainable, organic, less processed. So our platform is really designed to try and act as a bridge to help these brave entrepreneurs, so-called, go out to sea.
Thanks. Courtney?
Yeah, so my name is Courtney Magici. I'm the director of the Ocean Visions UN Decade Collaborative Center for Ocean Climate Solutions. So the Decade Collaborative Center is under the UN Ocean Decade umbrella. It's also a partnership between Ocean Visions, the Georgia Aquarium, and Georgia Tech. And we focus not only on ocean-based innovations and solutions, but also on education and outreach at the Ocean Climate Nexus as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Cooley. I'm Director of Climate Science at Ocean Conservancy, based here in Washington. Ocean Conservancy is a nonprofit organization that is really focused on finding solutions that will sustain the ocean today and also the people who depend on it. And our vision is really a healthier ocean supported by a more just world. And my role at Ocean Conservancy is to make sure that the climate-based policy, or the climate-related policies and actions that we're advocating for, are based on hard evidence and the best available evidence.
Thanks. So let's start with the big question. What are the opportunities that you guys see for the next year, for the next 5 years, for the next decade? And Mark, do you want to start off?
Sure. So we look for that intersection of economic growth, sustainability, and impact on the community, which is not just STEM-based jobs, but as well as going down the spectrum of skill sets. So what would that be for us? One is once-in-a-generation opportunity for us on the East Coast, 20, possibly 30 gigawatts of offshore wind, the amount of investment that's happening on the East Coast as we speak. That money is going to go all the way into ports and infrastructure. So we look at a lot of the startups on the innovation of lowering the impact or increasing the efficiency. Two, 90%-ish of global trade is on a deep sea ship, which runs on bunker C, which is like liquid coal. Not many people realize that. And so shipping is now being pressured to decarbonize, as well as it's also very analog. And that's the global economy. Three, the 9 billion people, the demand for protein continues to go up, some of it not very sustainable. So the future of particularly aquaculture. Other areas, technology-based coastal restoration, which is unfortunately a growth area as well. And then there's the ocean pollution, whether that be combating plastics, the nitrate issues haven't been solved, or even criteria emissions around ports, around environmental justice. As we focus on carbon, those issues have not exactly have gotten even better. So that's what we see as our opportunities.
Oh, thanks, Mark. Courtney?
Yeah, so I would say a big opportunity is we're starting to see a lot of interest from multi-sector approaches, which is great. So we do have a lot of interest from startups in the private sector, but also the public sector. So a lot of people that presented before us have already talked about the Ocean Climate Action Plan, which is great. But we definitely need additional, massive support from the federal government to help with de-risking some of these technologies, as well as providing support for field trials as well.
And I think from where I sit, opportunities really include this new ability to look at the entire portfolio of options that are out there. In 2019, the high-level panel, now the Ocean Panel, really reviewed the major opportunities to use the ocean as a canvas for mitigation options. And number one was expansion of ocean renewable energy. Number two was these changes in maritime shipping. Three was conserving our ocean spaces. And four was changes in sustainability of protein and fish. And then fifth was potentially carbon removal. And so all together, they calculated that could account for a large chunk of the mitigation gap that we need to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius under the Paris Agreement. And now I think we're at this place where we can look at these portfolio of options, see things that are ready to go, get those moving forward, and start thinking about maybe higher risk, not risky in terms of potentially outcomes, but success or timeline. We don't have a real clear handle on how some of these options will pan out, especially when it comes to carbon removal. So we're now able to look at that portfolio, start identifying what level of risk or urgency we want to inject into it, and start implementing ocean solutions under that entire umbrella.
Well, I think that leads nicely into the next question, and maybe, Sarah, if you want to continue on, is opportunities, but also, as you said, risks, challenges.
Yeah.
The scale of this is so large. What do you see as the major challenges?
So many challenges. I think everyone here is motivated by a huge sense of urgency. Everybody's really impatient to get started and make a big dent. But the climate system has a lot of momentum going into it, and it's going to take a while to bend the curve. The challenge is really how to get started, how to really spin up promising options at a scale that will make that dent, but still have low environmental outcomes or positive environmental outcomes, low risks and positive outcomes, and also, really importantly, sustain and support and lift up the communities that depend on the ocean, and providing the sweet spot that really acts on all of those things, acts on the climate challenge, promotes sustainability, and promotes equitable human development. That's the real challenge in my book.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo some of that. Certainly, we have a responsibility to be thoughtful in our approaches and calculate risk, but, we also have a responsibility to people and planet to not waste any more time. So, we're all very comfortable here in Washington, D.C., but, the 1 in 8 people that were displaced in Louisiana just last year due to climate impacts are not comfortable. And so we do owe it to, be thoughtful and responsible, but also act with a sense of urgency.
I think here we are sitting in the nation's capital. Big picture coming down. I think for us, we're on the bottom looking up. So some of the risks and the conversations we have are very small and tactical. I am a blue carbon startup, real case example, and I'm looking to try and really develop these blue carbon projects. So the questions become, is the MRV mature enough? Is the policy supportive enough? Is the dollar per ton of carbon there? Could it be there? Who would finance you in a small universe? Is it an impact family office? Could it be a corporate? Could it be angel investors? Very tough tactical questions to a brave entrepreneur from the bottom looking up.
So, Mark, you used an acronym that everybody on the stage might be familiar with, but MRV, could you sort of explain that and talk about that a little bit?
Monitor, reporting, and verifying. So if the private sector, the concept of the private sector can help scale faster, and so that means there could be a price of carbon, and you have a market derived originally from the cap and trade, right, on criteria emissions. But if you can't monitor, report it, and verify, if the buyer of the credit, I think a certain large corporate in Atlanta just got sued. I'm sure their intentions were very good, but there was the argument was that what they bought as a carbon credit was not really truly what it said it was. Then there's the greenwashing and all the other. So it shows you that even with the best intentions, maybe not the best intentions, but if the capacity of MRV is not necessarily there, that's a big impediment to the concept of the private sector helping to scale and have a larger role in climate change.
Sarah, you look like you have something you want to add.
I do. I have a lot of thoughts about verification. I think, a good colleague summed it up as saying MRV is ensuring that whatever solution we put in place is ensuring that that reality lives up to the promise. Making sure that what you set out to do is actually what happened. And, there's lots of concepts about how to actually implement such a system. And we need that for all of our portfolio of ocean-related decarbonization, from making sure that maritime shipping changes are going to actually pan out and give us those reductions that we're banking on. And, all the way down to experimental carbon removal methods. In every case, the protocols are going to be very different. But in every case, the protocols are probably going to have to rely on a broader system that is sort of collectively implemented by issue experts, both in the government and private sector and in the academy as well. Because, in the ocean, for example, it's really hard to confirm that you've really made a difference in the carbon cycle without basin scale or even global scale models. And a lot of governments are the ones that have the supercomputer capacity to actually execute those models. So the verification challenge is really non-trivial. And I think it definitely merits a really deep community conversation about how are we actually going to confirm that our dreams are matching up to the realities.
Yeah, I would just add really quickly, MRV is very important for sure, and there are definitely a lot of innovations and technologies that need additional research in MRV for sure. But there are also some that, may be seen as a little bit less riskier per se, or we, essentially have more information and research right now. Some of those lower hanging fruits are, nature-based solutions, right? So we do know that, seagrasses, mangroves, tidal marshes, store up to 5 times more carbon per hectare than terrestrial forests, which is why we need to work with the conservation community as well to protect and restore some of those ecosystems. But, in addition to that, they also provide socioeconomic benefits, right? So in the coast, whether we're talking about alternative livelihoods for fishermen, they also, provide storm surge protection for communities. And so I think there are definitely some innovations and solutions that we could move a little bit more quickly on than others. And so as Sarah and I talked about earlier behind scenes, we definitely need a suite of options. It's going to be a portfolio. There's no one solution that's going to save us. We need to consider all of them.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up this idea of, this portfolio of all the things that nature-based solutions do for us. They protect our coasts, they nourish our souls, they provide food, they provide jobs. Yeah. And I think it's so important to think about the entire benefits that these spaces provide to us. And I think that's something that I'm particularly focused on as I think about carbon removal, to make sure that the options being thought about are things that are going to give communities the ocean they want and they need.
Yeah.
And right now, the conversation is really in the sort of academic, federal, scientist space, which is a very different space than people who use and make decisions about the ocean every day. Yeah. So I do see that as being an urgent need to help cross that bridge and really co-develop these solutions with the people who are going to be living side by side with them.
Absolutely.
So one of the points from the plenary session this morning is that, for example, in the Gulf of Mexico, the communities that have been most harmed by climate change, by coastal industrialization, might be asked to also now contribute for some of these solutions. How do you balance that? For some place like Louisiana, where we know if we don't do something, climate change is just going to get worse. But on the other hand, some of these actions have a big footprint, anything that scales. So what do you think about scaling? How do we protect communities? How do we protect people in this?
Yeah, if I could start on that one. I think it's important when you're, dealing with communities that have been impacted the most, you want to make sure that they're being engaged first, right? So engage them at the concept phase, not when you're ready for implementation, right? Don't come in with an idea when you haven't consulted them at all in the process. So if you already are at the stage where you're implementing, you missed the mark already. And so I think it's important. A lot of these communities, when you actually go, I was in Louisiana last week at the State of the Coast Conference, so this one is particularly sensitive for me. But when you go to these communities, a lot of the citizens there, they want these projects. They want these, tidal marsh or mangrove settlements or nature-based solution type projects. They're big fans and proponents of them. And so I think it's important to listen to them, not tell them what solution they need, but let them tell you what they're experiencing. A lot of them have a lot more knowledge than we do, whether we like to admit it or not. And so I think it's important to listen first, but making sure that we're coming to them before the idea is completely baked.
Yeah, the ethics of all of this is something that keeps me up at night. And I think speaking to an indigenous leader in Alaska, I was hearing how carbon removal startups were calling the tribe saying, we really want to do this in your space. And they were like, no thanks, that's not a priority. And really the priority was much more restoring the connection of people and the system for reasons well other than carbon removal. Sure. And so I think we also need to be prepared to hear, because we're coming at this question from a very Western scientific, top-down, government, synergistic point of view. We need to be prepared to hear, no thanks,
Absolutely.
So Mark, what are the challenges? I mean, we hear a lot about the opportunities of, startup companies, but what are the challenges of working with communities and getting that connection right?
Startups are definitely not necessarily, they would not put a community sometimes in their critical path. It's hard to get your arms around community. So where the startups do say that they can have an impact on a positive note in the community, is maybe the example you just gave. A certain community, when I was the economic director, I pulled up a childhood asthma heat map by neighborhood. Dark red, right at the port where I-95 ran through, lower income neighborhood of color. Highest asthma rates for children, Could it be from the port? Could it be from the highway? Could it be from substandard housing? Could it be from home heating oil? The Department of Health didn't know. And so there, we see startups that say, I had taken advances of, let's say, LED technologies coming off of cars and your phone, hyperspectral imaging, et cetera. The point is that there's a lot of advances in digital technology. So we have a young startup team that says we can capture that data a lot easier. We can correlate it and see possibly where, really determine what is causing those asthma rates. And that means now you can focus on tackling that issue. And that community was a little less focused on carbon because they were sick.
Yeah.
And it was more the people talking about carbon coming off of the more affluent neighborhoods, right, with social mobility. So there is an example. So I didn't have a great answer for some of the startups because I didn't know who do you talk to on that from maybe the state level, but maybe the federal. But the point is like those analog sensors that are really old and expensive, we think we can go around them and get the data much quicker. And that's the challenge of the startup. We're with them together. It's like, how do you get that to see if it could work, if it's tested, and the veracity of the data that they're getting. So that's an open question, right? It's an example where technology could be ahead of both the policy or the process, right?
Yeah, and I'm a recovering chemical oceanographer myself. And so as one, I was trained very much to do the natural science and engineering, but I was not trained to reach out to communities. And so I think partnerships is critical. You picked up on that in your remark where, you know, the person leading the project may not have that skill set. And so it's so important to say, we need to have partnerships with people whose superpower is connecting with communities and who is able to kind of create that bridging connection so that communities can have the foundational information they need so that that dialogue can happen about what are community priorities and how can the science actually either be shaped to fill those priorities or maybe reprioritized to fit the priorities.
I just want to underscore really quickly that I think it's important to realize that that skill set is a talent and just as important as the science.
That's right.
And so I think it gets misconceived. Not a lot of people support or understand outreach or the ability to be a communicator, a science communicator, as much as the actual science itself or the technology. So I think it's just important to underscore that that is a skill set that not everybody has. And so it's important to leverage those relationships.
That's right, that's right.
And so it leads me to my next question, which is, you know, there's been, and maybe we're focusing a little bit too much on carbon dioxide removal, we can go to the other techniques as well, but clearly there needs to be more research. You know, some of these techniques are, you know, some of them are in a computer model, some of them are on a lab bench. How do we move forward with research? You know, there's been a lot of discussions about codes of conduct, and Sarah, I know that's something you've been involved in.
Yeah, I think certainly creating codes of conduct to help researchers all be on the same page and kind of starting from the same norms, operating expectations. That's a big opportunity right there. And it's a pretty low-hanging fruit to kind of get started with saying, like, yes, we're all on the same page. We're all going to adhere to similar norms. We're all going to exchange data. We're going to be transparent about these things. We're going to engage communities at this point. Those things are really, really important. And those have actually been really helpful to guide research and in a lot of fields where environmental harms or social harms could be outcomes. You know, when I'm talking about like public health research or, you know, gene editing. Those sorts of structures can be very helpful. But I think also we need to be thinking about iterative models where, you know, modeling work is used to closely inform how in situ tests might work. And then the results of those in situ tests are kind of brought back into this scenario building situation so that conversations can be had about, like, are these acceptable scenarios for the people who are operating in the ocean space and for the scientists? Will these possible outcomes be kind of like informative to the things we need to know? So I think there's, it's no longer a linear research model we need to be looking at. We really need to be looking at this sort of like checking, consulting, retuning, and then proceeding kind of a framework.
Any thoughts from Mark, Courtney?
We stand outside of the academic and wait. We run with the technology, so no comment.
But I guess I mean, some of this research is going to be done by entrepreneurs. It's not just going to be academics or government scientists. Industry is doing a lot of projects as well.
So translational coming out of the research institutions, usually it's like not the PI themselves, but it's one of the grad students or even undergrad. We see a lot of that. Self-identified, I'm going to run with this. The inventor tends to stay in the university. Still, not more D than R at that point is what we see. And they also engage with the federal agencies. So that could be CRADAs, SBIRs, and so that's what we see is that. So we continue to try and work and map out and help our startups. We learn ourselves because there's so many federal agencies. Or the government labs, and also corporates. Corporates, less R, more D as well. They'll do some research and work with that very much is more of an iterative process. They're like, we think this could work. We'll work with you as a startup in a careful pilot. So that's the kind of more D than R that we see. But the core research is, once again, we're in Kendall Square in the middle of Cambridge for a reason. We kind of hang outside of the main gate of all those schools and say, who wants to come out and play?
It's an inspiring atmosphere.
It's a little cold during the winter, though. If you're outside.
Absolutely.
So one question I have for all of you is, this is a rapidly moving space. And for many in the public, they're just, these concepts, they're all new. How do we engage with people and not do it in a way where we're sort of pushing, an agenda on them?
Yeah, I can start with that one. So, yeah, I think it's one of those things where because there is a sense of urgency, we, as scientists and communicators, we want to run as quickly as we can to the solution. But, we do have to slow down a little bit and be thoughtful about going together. And so I think sort of a key step to doing that is just being as transparent as possible as we can with the innovations and solutions, but also making sure that we are being not only transparent, but inclusive with the process as well. I think it's one of those things where I personally, this is a personal opinion, feel like this particular space, especially if we're talking about CDR, it's fairly new, right? And so it's one of those things where we're just now getting support around this idea, right? So we just are starting to get this referenced in policy frameworks and regulatory frameworks. And so I think it's one of those things where we have to be thoughtful about how we're communicating, how we're being transparent, working with all the different sectors to make sure that everyone is involved. At this point, it's all hands on deck. And so I think transparency, but also being really thoughtful about equity is going to be important to making the general public comfortable.
And I think another key piece of that is, building ocean literacy across the board and environmental literacy across the board. So climate change can't be a bad word anymore. It can't be a politicized word. It has to be like, this is the world we're in. I think a lot about I have school-age kids. And so I think a lot about how to talk to them about the work I do without bumming them out constantly. I'm not successful all the time. But recently, I had the pleasure of speaking to a bunch of sixth graders about the water cycle. And so I could kind of talk about anything. And I really chose to underscore things that I knew would not be in the curriculum. I knew they were going to be talking about the very particular things. And instead, I talked about how they were connected to their community, how the water gets to their faucets, where does it go? And get ready for changes, kids, because it's going to get weird. And that was something that they were receptive to. And so explaining to people who are not ocean informed that, like, we are all connected, we are all a part of our surroundings, and it's to our peril to forget that. I think if we can lay that groundwork, then it's another step to say, hey, you know that change you noticed? Here's something that contributed to it. Let's talk about that and what solutions might look like. So I do think it's also really important for us to acknowledge that we are part of our surroundings, and we have done this to ourselves. We have caused this climate change, and we are going to be reaping the consequences of it. And in that framework, we are now trying to do something about it. And so I think it's very important. And I think it involves a little humility, too, to kind of get to that point.
So we recently had a meeting. We were fundraising out west, and the principal said to us, my principal's not interested in the ocean. She's only focused on climate. Right. So I get why do I bring that up is we do arm waving. We throw some of the buzzwords. We think it's necessary. It's pedantic sometimes, many times, but. Yeah, the ocean is a massive tragedy of the commons. It's the average, this is out of sight, over the horizon, not realizing your supply chain, maybe COVID, more people are sensitive to it, and everything around the ocean and the ocean economy and the environment is interconnected, doesn't recognize borders. Just look at our regulatory process in the last 50 years. We regulated coal-fired power plants, we regulated land-based transportation, and now it's Maritime's turn. Why were they last? Or it's close to last. Maybe aerospace is behind it. So we do wave our arms a little bit, and at the risk of being pedantic to certain people, it's like, look, let's take an ocean-centric view, and then we try and make. There's code words, haven't been in venture, that we hear a lot. Is like, it sounds like something I should donate to. Translated, I don't see the investment case. So we're trying to make this idea of sustainability, just like renewable energy or electric cars. You can have economic growth, return, as well as tackle sustainability. Yeah.
So that sort of leads to the question you raised, that this is really a world problem, an international problem. You know, the ocean is interconnected. How do we deal with that? You know, the ocean moves.
I mean, I think certainly we're seeing a new commitment to international cooperation when it comes to climate action and how it connects to the ocean. We have a recurring ocean climate dialogue. That's huge. I mean, this kind of speaks to what you just said about how your principal kind of just came to the ocean as a climate connected thing. So I think that's progress. I think it's important because the ocean can be out of sight, out of mind. It is important for all of us to be voices for the ocean, to help speak for those details that we understand so well and other people maybe have never encountered in their lives. I think it's important to also recognize the shortcomings of that process. It's very easy for people to say, well, that's kind of not my problem because another country caused it. And I think again it goes back to my previous point about humility. A lot of the biggest economies are the major contributors to the problem, and so I think solutions have to really be embraced. Effective solutions, not just pretty words, need to be embraced by the biggest contributors to the issue to actually make it right. There are a lot of smaller scale solutions that are going to have to be implemented, and that's going to be tough.
Absolutely. I think, so working, under the UN Ocean Decade umbrella, so I think it's a great opportunity being in the decade. Right now we're 2 years from the middle of the decade, and there's still a lot of work to be done, but there are, I think, currently over 375 different decade actions, of which more than half touch on climate. And so I think that's a great opportunity to really leverage that. I think, at the Climate COP, we just had the first ocean symposium at a Climate COP. So I think the narrative is changing, but I think I love when you reference public health. We've talked about this before, but so I think that's an easy exercise to make it relatable, right? So like if you think of the ocean or even more broadly the environment as someone you love and they're sick and a doctor comes to you and says, hey, I have a solution that could save their life, but there are some risks and there might be some side effects. Would you not consider it? And so I think that makes it very relatable to everyone, no matter where you live. So I think, yeah.
And to that point, Courtney's point is the power of the consumer is, let's use shipping. Let's use shipping as an example. Shipping is going through these throes of how to figure out how to decarbonize because they have to. It's heavily regulatory driven. So if we think it's tough what happens in this town and get things done on a federal level, that's regulated by the United Nations. Right? So some of like IUU and similar is who is actually going to enforce that out in international waters. So to not throw your arms up is that regionally you still have market power, whether that be United States or the European Union. So this is an interpretation, I'm not saying this is policy, but European Union is saying on its own it's going to start regulating shipping and carbon. Translated, what does that mean for the shipping operator? Where they may be okay, one operator may be okay that it's taken so long with the UN because it's tough. It's like, wow, that means I got a vessel that's not compliant if I have to pull into Brussels. It's very much analogous to why California was under the gun with their CAFE standards in automotive, because the automotive industry didn't want two standards. So a couple things is, one is that just because some of this is regulated on an international level doesn't mean on a national level you still can't influence it from the edge, because industry now has to decide, if we don't, I don't want 2 or 3 different standards for my global. And then lastly, going back to consumer, that's the most powerful. That's why we like some of the consumer product goods, because CPG companies move the fastest, because why? They're the most sensitive to us as consumers. So when the more the consumer is aware, and that's transparency and data and more awareness, we think that actually can move the needle sometimes faster than policy can.
I'm so glad you brought up shipping. There's a lot of solutions that are ready to be implemented in shipping, and you mentioned earlier the bunker fuels use and just the existence of cold ironing, where ships are still running their engines at the dock to keep the lights on. It's like, we can fix that. We know how. So there's some really exciting ready-to-go solutions there, which I think we need to really get behind and proliferate, because they're ready and they're going to make a big dent. So I'm always excited when we can uncover solutions like that will help meet those global goals, also improve the public health of the people living in the port communities, and we know how to do it. So I think it's important for us to recognize how those do exist, and they are sort of breaks in the clouds when it comes to the confusion and the struggle that we're all part of.
Well, I was going to say, you had said solutions that are at hand. Speakers this morning were talking about the growth in offshore wind, which is different than the carbon dioxide removal, which might still be in the research phase. This is really in the deployment phase.
That's right.
So what do you guys think? Great opportunity? What are the challenges?
Oh, we love it. I mean, as I said earlier, on the East Coast, 20 gigawatts plus, it could potentially be so disruptive on how things have been maybe even the last 100 years is, if you have excess electricity when the wind's blowing hard at night, what do you do with that now source of green electricity? Can you electrolyze hydrogen? So you've turned parts of the country that traditionally have been importing whatever transportation or heating fuel, in theory now, like even possibly being able to generate green fuel, green hydrogen, or simply electrification, right? Which some of that could be storage or not. The other is going back to community. We're talking about certain, we work in Massachusetts. Boston is booming, and we've been to Boston. It is booming, rents, everything, it's STEM driven. Go 50 miles down to the coast.
Yeah, my son lives in Framingham, don't tell me that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So go down 50 miles on the coast or go 50 miles the other way. that coastal community, it's a different world. It's not part of that economic boom. So econ disparity continues to widen. So the amount of infrastructure investment, including from this president, with like the IRA and the other bills, but industry is going to do it on its own anyway because of the power purchasing agreements. So if it's done right, it's a once in a generation opportunity. If I can give an example, I didn't go on that trip, but evidently the British had a survey where they actually called it this. The crappiest city in the UK was called Hull. It was Rust Belt. And today, hundreds of millions of dollars of investment around manufacturing offshore wind turbines. So that whole renaissance, that's the potential of a renaissance you can have.
Yeah, I would just add, again, in the Ocean Action Climate Plan, there are really strong KPIs, quantifiable KPIs around, offshore wind, but devil's advocate, offshore wind is not an ocean-based renewable energy. It happens in the ocean, but I would argue that it's not ocean-based, right? So I think we need to do a little bit more research around, wave, tidal stream as well. And so, yeah, there are other solutions to consider. Not saying offshore wind isn't great. It definitely needs to be part of the portfolio like we talked about earlier, but.
Yeah, and I think the ambitious growth that the Biden administration has called for, 30 gigawatts by 2030, is, in some ways, that's a wonderful goal, and in some ways, it's incredibly daunting because the scale up is so unprecedented, and we still have some fundamental challenges and sort of place-based fights about like siting, inclusion of communities in these decisions, and I think also it's really important to not lose sight of the fact that citing large amounts of renewable resources in the ocean is a great idea, it's a renewable thing, but on the other hand, it can have such profound social outcomes for communities around it. We still have large arguments about how to actually do the land-based infrastructure to plug in to these wind farms. Like, how are we gonna have these, where are we gonna put these sites that need to be placed in the coastal zone? That's a problem. How do we make sure that this doesn't wind up disenfranchising or disproportionately harming communities that have already been marginalized? Well-sited and responsible growth of offshore wind is great, and I think from a policy perspective, you're still sticking them in the ocean, so it's kind of an ocean-based solution. So depending on like which hat you wear in this community, you might be like, it's absolutely ocean-based, But I think it's really important for us to kind of remember all of those dimensions of such an ambitious goal. We do know how to stick individual turbines in place and do a good job with that, but that scale factor is what we're going to be grappling with.
And if I can add also is just that having been from the clean tech world now in blue tech ocean, just because it's renewable energy doesn't mean it can't be done wrong.
Yeah.
Right. So that's concentrated solar that has a massive water footprint in the middle of the southwest. Bulldozing forests to put relatively low energy density photovoltaic solar. And I'm a big advocate for solar, spent half my career working on it. When you look at all the flat roofs, just land on any airport and look out the window, all the flat roofs, right? Nothing gets bulldozed. So but the incentive system is really on the bigger project. So just agree on the nuance. Just because it's renewables doesn't mean you still can't have a negative impact or do it wrong. Another example on the supply chain, if going back to that heat map point of the asthma rates, if we're going to build all these wind turbines and we end up having 400 diesel engines working in the same neighborhoods, it's going in the wrong direction. So the supply chain is really a question of lower impact of the supply chain, which just means starting with diesel engines and other aspects. You can do it wrong. So.
That's a great point.
So we've sort of hit on some of the technology. Maybe let's talk a little bit more about some of the nature-based approaches. And we haven't really talked about fishing and aquaculture and everything from aquaculture for us to eat, but also potentially aquaculture for carbon dioxide removal. So thoughts on that?
Would you like to?
Yeah, sure, I can start. So Ocean Visions somewhat recently, released a Sinking Seaweed report. And I think it's important to understand that a lot of these solutions are expensive, right? These are expensive pathways. When you're talking about sinking seaweed, just as an example, that involves sinking the seaweed, at very deep depths. A few field trials can cost $500 million to $1 billion, right? And so we really need resources to move the needle on a lot of these. There definitely are, more coastal blue carbon opportunities that you can explore that are potentially cheaper and provide those alternative livelihoods, whether you're harvesting, seaweed to eat, or there are definitely organizations that use, sargassum for byproducts of other things. And so there are a lot of things to consider. And then when you get into byproducts, you get into the conversation of are you actually storing the carbon? Is it being released? So there's a lot to unpack there, but I think sort of as we already alluded to earlier, with the nature-based solutions, there are tons of co-benefits. And I think that's one thing that's not necessarily argued and that most of the community agrees on, and we're able to move the needle on a lot faster than other solutions.
Yeah, I think that's so important I don't think we can underline it enough, can we,
Yeah,
today?
just say it all the time.
I think the multiple benefits that these natural spaces offer are just enormous. And the problem is they can't be, summed up on an accounting sheet all that conveniently. And so it's very easy to overlook them or to underestimate their impact on communities. Absolutely, we know that restoring natural spaces is of great interest, or maybe to kind of mitigate harms done elsewhere. But when it comes to restoring the entire suite of services that those spaces provided, it can take decades to actually confirm that you're capturing that amount of carbon that you thought you were capturing. And then, natural spaces also can be subject to destruction from, erosion and sea level rise and human, zoning decisions. And so I think that's something that is important to kind of reckon with and create those additional safeguards around those systems, because we know that preserving those systems is really kind of the best medicine for the systems.
Right.
Before we have to, to kind of replenish them back from a damaged state. So I think that's a really important piece of the conversation, and that kind of speaks to what we were talking about before about those community connections and connections of people with their surroundings. People are so tuned in to what those natural spaces do for communities, and yet we still grapple with how we can actually sum them up in our accounting measures that show us how we're doing against climate. So certainly I think we need to be kind of knowing that our balance sheets are probably incomplete.
Yeah.
Seafood has the lowest carbon footprint of the animal proteins, particularly shellfish. Right? Particularly oysters are pretty benign, right? It filters the water. Our domestic waters are heavily regulated. If you don't believe that, ask U.S. fishermen if they're over-regulated or under-regulated. Okay, but our view is that a bit is because we work with startups, it gets a little academic because chances are oysters and sea bass replacing chicken on the American dinner table is pretty low, practically, right? But still, that we're seeing the first startups put what they're working on, sustainable fish products like fish jerky and such, from a carbon footprint. And it's valid, but still, they have to convince the consumer, the American consumer. On other nature-based, one of the companies out in North Carolina we just backed up uses a tech-based 3D cement printer for nature-based. So they print a block like this table size, multiple blocks, and it's meant to grow the seaweed and the oysters. So it replaces dropping rock and concrete. Their first customer actually was an oil company in Louisiana, which was having excess erosion affecting their operations. So they attenuate the wave. And then the corporate, the team, the engineering team just scratched their head. It's like, it works, and it's actually carbon zero, maybe negative. And now it went up to the chain. So we're excited about that company. Not all of them have to be tech-based because they're not the only ones doing that approach, but it is a nature-based. They're in the Chesapeake here, in the port of Baltimore with all the dredging tailings. Can you take those tailings and put it back into the printer and get a 2-for-1? wide open. A lot more research actually needs to be done. Could they tackle nitrates with the formulation? Then you get a 3-for-1. Needs more research. We're excited about companies like that.
I did want to go back. You had mentioned the carbon footprint or the greenhouse gas footprint of seafood, which varies a lot from some things that are very low to some that are actually as bad as other protein sources. And Sarah, you had mentioned the high-level panel, and that was one of their key solutions. And so I didn't know if you have more thoughts or things.
Well, I think it's important to think about that full life cycle. We know that in some cases, sea vegetables, kelp, can actually be used to replace fossil fuel intensive products on land. And so that's an area I'm really excited about on the research, because rarely are we really good at doing life cycle analyses, but growing more kelp and things like that for human consumption has sort of market considerations. How do you have a populace that's really excited about fried land animals get excited about dried kelp and things like that? It's a cultural shift. Yeah. It's a taste shift. And I think thinking about how we can replace things that we're already, spending too much carbon on, so through, heavy use of fossil fuels to, for example, create agricultural crops for feed. That's an area of research that seems very, very exciting. And the reason that, currently that feed crops, it's an economic win rather than growing kelp and feeding it to cattle, for example, is because of the high fossil fuel subsidies that we have. So I think that also needs to be part of that discussion as we think about the full-scale impact of growing seafood, growing marine products that can be used on land, and then thinking about their final destiny.
If I could just add a quick call to action for Blue Food. So under the UN Ocean Decade, they just endorsed a program for Blue Food, and they're also in the process of identifying partners for a Decade Collaborative Center focused on Blue Food. So if you are interested in the Blue Food conversation, please do reach out to me. I would love to connect you to IOC UNESCO.
That's great. Yeah, and kind of I think just to multiple on that is that maybe 2 quick examples. There's a company that I learned a lot from 7 or 8 years ago, Wild Planet. Wild Planet was a company that the farthest along on, some people say that it doesn't exist as a null set, but wild fisheries and sustainability product company. And is it a market? It doesn't even exist. They follow the Monterey Bay Standard. Spent a lot of time with the CEO, and he talked about all the sustainable fishery practices and how it's audited by Greenpeace. But what he said he couldn't tackle was the supply chain. And when we were trying to get him to set up possibly seafood processing in New England, he's like, you could try your best, but so if you buy their Pacific sardine, for example, it's caught in the Pacific, BPA-free, organic olive oil, it's really tasty. From Thailand, it ends up in here or up in Boston, New York. That supply chain is global. It is not, to your point.
That's right.
But that goes back to the policy point, is like the numbers will never work in the US. Well, why don't they work? That's a rhetorical question. It's like, that is where your economic development tools in your working waterfront, why can't it work? Why can't we have, using a little more automation, some incentive tools, economic incentive tools, where some of that is brought back on shore? So another example is evidently New England squid is considered very high quality over South China Sea. It's still labeled as made in America. It's caught in New England, shipped to China to be processed and put back on our, back in the supermarket, made in America. And the response is so much cheaper just to send it literally on the other side of the world. They get it processed and sent all the way back, because the true cost of that shipping is not really reflected.
Not factored in. That's right.
So we've got about 8 minutes left. One of the things we heard in the plenary this morning is we need to act quickly. We might not have the time to, Sarah, you are a recovering academic. I am still an academic. Things take time, they move slowly. Maybe we need to move fast. We need to break things if we're going to actually reduce carbon emissions as dramatically as all the models suggest we have to do. So how do we do that but still do it in a responsible way?
Well, I think it is to our detriment if we think that we can move fast and maybe break some things in the ocean, because the ocean is really good at breaking us. So I think we need to be aware that the ocean predates humans and it will post-date humans. So we are tinkering with a mega system that it's just so much bigger than us. Mm-hmm. When we use the move fast and break things model, that's based on tech innovation. If Facebook breaks Facebook, it's down for a day. But if the hunt for climate solutions breaks something fundamental in the climate system, that's a bigger downtime. So I think the things that we talked about, the iterative approaches, the consultative approaches, the visioning of what is the ocean we really want, mm-hmm. and how can we get there. We've kind of dilly-dallied for decades enough. 3 years of research more, 5 years of research. We can be kind of incrementally growing these solutions, and we have solutions that are ready to be put to work right now. So again, with that portfolio approach, we can start a bunch of things today that we know are going to make a difference while we work on the things that we're not so sure about, and we iterate. There's a lot of us. We can do hard things together. Mm-hmm. We can work in parallel. That's what it's all about. So that's how I see it fitting together. We can be urgently working on the solutions. There are solutions ready to go. We are here to do it.
I mean, Courtney, Ocean Visions. I mean,
the name is all.
Yeah, we're doing it all. No, so yeah, at Ocean Visions, we obviously leverage our network, which is an amazing network. It includes academics, accelerators, VCs, large institutions. I see a colleague from the Georgia Aquarium is here. And so I guess I would underscore that. It's gonna, as Jane said in her plenary very eloquently, we can't do it in silos. We have to do it together. And I would say in this particular space, we get a little caught up on trust, right? Like nobody trusts each other. Like the innovators, or the academics don't trust the innovators, the general public don't trust whomever. And so I think that's a sticking point a bit, or maybe goes back to challenges. But I'd like to sort of flip the narrative and see that as an opportunity. Now that we do have interest from all of these different sectors, now that we are in a place where we are past denying that climate is an issue, now that we are all at least agreeing that we're not going to move the needle without the ocean, it's just impossible at this point. I think it's important to sort of, as Sarah already alluded to, move on to the things that we can move. Like, let's stop talking about it. It's time to be about it.
I give President Biden a lot of credit for these recent bills and the ocean climate, just having a vision. Maritime was not on anyone's radar on the policy side for too long, decarbonizing maritime. So with that said, though, I think on a state level and even the municipality is something to say, think big, think bigger, because a lot of times you show up and that person is still angry at that person for whatever they did on this level. And it may be because we show up and we're outsiders, so it's easy for us, right? And we go down to the Gulf Coast, but when we talk, it's like think big. What could this ecosystem look like 10 years from now, 15 years from now? Mm-hmm. And then going back to the other point, as I said earlier, it's the average consumer can drive the fastest change. Mm-hmm. If their awareness, particularly their pocketbook, and I think there's still a lack of awareness on not just all of the impact of our supply chain and what we consume, but particularly on the ocean. Mm-hmm. Right? The more, maybe you'll buy more local fish, right? And realize how do I have all you can eat shrimp for $9? The answer to that is not very pretty. Mm-hmm. And it starts way over on the other side of the world, mm-hmm. right? So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, look, we just got more time. We have enough time for each of you, if you guys have some final thoughts, some key messages you want to get across.
Well, I think, I'm actually really inspired, even though I tend to be the voice of doom on a lot of phone calls. You know, I'm still inspired because everyone is here, everyone is focused on the ocean, and everyone is ready to speak for the ocean here. And that's a lot. That's really something big. You know, I'm absolutely inspired by the previous speakers, you know, really calling us to work harder, do better, because we know we can. We have some things ready to go. We have vision like crazy. We have plans like crazy in the Ocean Climate Action Plan. We just got to keep working. And I think we're here, we're ready for it. We're charged up to do it.
Absolutely. I would just also just really quickly like to shout out the youth. So, you know, I've been in town for a couple days and I've met a lot of really amazing young people that have great ideas. And obviously they're going to be the ones that are carrying this initiative forward, which is why, you know, under the Decade Collaborative Center, education and continuing education opportunities are so important to us. But, you know, for me, it's just like really cool because it wasn't that long before, you know, that long ago when I was in the audience, right? And so I think it's important to remember that, you know, as we are all pursuing these different innovations and solutions and regulatory frameworks, to make sure that you're actually, you know, giving those opportunities to young people to have a seat at the table, even if they're just, you know, a fly on the wall. Those opportunities are important. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, if you take the time to just listen to them, they have really great ideas too. So I would definitely advocate for the youth.
For us, similar. I've made a lot of college points, but to not be completely ageism, we actually see a lot of entrepreneurs who are in their 40s as well. Yeah. Been there, done that. So look more like me, and I'm older than 40. So it's not just a 22-year-old, that stereotype of. We've seen a lot of people who I was in the tech industry. I've cashed out. I'm a sailor. I see what's happening on the ocean. I think I could do this. Right? We have a traceability seafood startup, and that's exactly the story. He kind of thought he was retired, and he couldn't help it when he was on the coast. With his friends who were growing stuff on the water. And he goes, I can help you digitize this. I think that for us, maybe summarize on the startup side, it'd be arrogant to say that an entrepreneur is gonna disrupt like this ocean question. So I think for us, it's more, all of that is under, for an entrepreneur who's brave enough to come out, it's under an umbrella of policy, consumer, and everything else we've talked about. And they have to work within that ecosystem of change. And then, but you know, we're going to continue that way. We think it's a new dog in a fight because there is one thing we can say generically about entrepreneurs. They don't say this is how it's done. They come out, could it be done this way? And two, they can take advantage of technology advances faster than the incumbents. Mm-hmm. So we will always kind of continue to work with the startups, but they can't be done in a vacuum. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to say, Sarah and I have a number of colleagues who are leaving academia to move into this entrepreneurial space, maybe more on the monitor and research verification side. But I think there's a big pull now of people who want to move beyond plans, move beyond, you know, more model simulations, and actually start doing something. Yeah. Yeah. So, just want to thank the panel, and if everybody can thank our speakers.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you to our wonderful panel. I kept hearing, think bigger, think visionary, fight, innovation. Like, those are the things to leave us with, so thank you very much for that. We are pleased to have Representative Derek Kilmer from Washington's 6th District join us. Representative Kilmer serves on the Appropriations Committee, including the Interior and Environment Subcommittee, Defense Subcommittee, and the Energy and Water Development Subcommittee, all extremely relevant for our lifeblood and our connection to the ocean and our waterways. And as a native of the Olympic Peninsula, Representative Kilmer knows the importance that our ocean plays in our climate globally. And he is committed to protecting our waters and improving the health of our watersheds and the communities that rely upon them. Representative Kilmer.
Good afternoon, everybody. I was asked to speak for 45 minutes. Sorry, 4 to 5 minutes, excuse me. Actually, that makes this one of the easier speaking engagements I've had. I will tell you the hardest speaking engagement I had. I was the Veterans Day speaker at South Colby Elementary School in my district, and I was given the assignment of talking about the importance of Veterans Day for preschool through 5th grade for 20 minutes. And went up to one of the teachers I knew and I said, 20 minutes? I'm screwed. And she gave me the best advice I've ever gotten in my entire time in public service. She said, Derek, here's the deal. Say whatever it is you got to say it in whatever amount of time you got to say it in, but if you see any of the kids start to pick their noses, wrap it up. And so I'm going to try to keep this brief, but if you feel like I'm running a little long, you all know what to do, all right? So why are we here? Why are we here? We are here for the 3,200 people in my district whose livelihoods are tied to shellfish growing and to fisheries, and whose livelihoods are at risk. In fact, I recently met with a 4th-generation shellfish grower who explained to me that unless we take action, the 5th generation of their family wouldn't be able to carry on their family business. We are here for the members of the Quinault Indian Nation and of the 4 coastal tribes that I represent that, as we sit here in this auditorium, are in the process of moving to higher ground. Just a few years ago, I was in Taholah. If you want to get a feel for Taholah, just Google Taholah and flooding. It's the lower reservation of the Quinault Indian Nation. I was with their then tribal president, a woman named Fawn Sharp, and we stood on the coast, and she said, you know, when I was a kid, the ocean was a football field's length away from our village, and now it's our front porch. And every time there is a severe storm, there are seawall breaches, and because their village is below sea level, it just fills up like a bowl. So we're here for them. We are here for the sailors who serve in the United States Navy. The department, and who are the largest employer in my district, is the Navy. We are here for them. The Department of Defense has called climate change a threat multiplier that substantially destabilizes our nation. We also know that most of our naval installations are built on the water. And so as we have seen rising sea levels and experienced resilience issues, that has come at a cost and a threat to them. And candidly, we're here for my daughter Sophie and other kids in her generation who suffer from asthma, who rely on us to make sure we're protecting our natural treasures. I don't know about you, up until years ago, just a few years ago, I had never had the forecast on my weather app be for smoke. And now that is commonplace, certainly in Washington State where I'm from, but unfortunately here today in our nation's capital where it's unhealthy to go outside. We are here because, as the governor of my state, Jay Inslee, has said, we are the first generation to feel the impacts of climate change and the last generation that can do something about it. And frankly, we're here because we need all oars in the water rowing in the same direction if we're going to confront these challenges and safeguard our environment and protect our health and preserve the vitality of our communities and our oceans. That's why we're here. You know, we recognize, each of us here recognizes that our oceans are incredibly diverse ecosystems with extraordinary species hosting a multitude of vital organisms and creatures that are critical to the balance of our planet. In the region that I represent, we understand that. We understand the profound impact that our oceans have, that our waters have. They are cornerstones of our economic security. They are supporting livelihoods of folks that are dependent on our oceans. But we know that all of that is at risk. And that sentiment underscores the urgency with which we need to address the challenges posed by climate change and work to have effective solutions. We are also here to celebrate some progress. Thanks to each of you in this room, thanks to folks throughout our country who have pushed Congress for action. We actually saw Congress take action with the passage last year of the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the most substantial single climate investment in U.S. history. It's already helping our nation tackle the climate crisis and create thousands and thousands of jobs in the green energy sector. It will reduce carbon emissions by roughly 40% by 2030. Just yesterday, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration unveiled its $2.6 billion implementation plan to help deliver some of the funds that were authorized as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And their plan will support our ocean health. They will support the health of our coastal communities in my neck of the woods, our coastal fisheries in my neck of the woods. They will help some of our coastal communities adapt to the challenges of climate change, and importantly, they will reflect the priorities of our tribal nations who not only have challenges, but also have treaty rights that depend on healthy oceans. But we're also here because we've got more work to do. We know that there are opportunities. Over the last decade, the U.S. Department of Energy and our exceptional national labs, including the Pacific Northwest National Lab in Sequim, Washington, in my district, have made remarkable investments in developing energy technologies that are critical to fueling the 21st century economy and generating clean and dependable energy. Just last summer, Secretary Granholm joined me in Sequim. She was the first cabinet official, I think, in America's history ever to visit Sequim, Washington. But she was able to see firsthand some of the innovation that was happening there related to tackling climate change and alternative energy sources and other innovations. And nevertheless, we know that further efforts are needed to advance renewable energy technologies that fully harness the ocean's potential for low-cost energy and decarbonization. That will require funding. It will require a robust strategy for deploying new renewable energy technologies in aquatic environments, which is part of the work that's happening in Sequim, Washington. It will require leveraging government resources and nationwide collaboration effectively to drive innovation and to deploy these blue energy technologies. If we do, we can bolster our country's competitiveness, we can foster job creation within that blue economy, we can secure affordable and clean and resilient energy sources for businesses and for families across the nations, even in areas that are currently far off the grid. Now, I take pride in the fact that the region I represent has spearheaded the drive for blue energy and water-based technologies that harness some of those marine energy resources like ocean waves and tides and currents and salinity and algae and temperature gradients. To capitalize on our innovation-driven efforts, I am gearing up to introduce a bipartisan bill called the Blue Energy Innovation Act, which is another reason I'm here. This legislation aims to strengthen federal initiatives to harness the blue economy, reaffirming the United States' global leadership in researching and developing and deploying blue energy technologies. It proposes federal support to drive technology innovation to enhance the deployment of next-generation renewable technologies in aquatic environments. It proposes facilitating some of the decarbonization efforts that we know are critical and facilitating the generation of new jobs in the blue economy. On top of that, it would establish a new Blue Economy Center of Excellence to support some of the interdisciplinary work that needs to happen, coordinating the entire alphabet soup of federal agencies that work in this space, as well as our national labs and our research institutions, our state governments, and other federal agencies in pursuit of these shared decarbonization and renewable energy goals. I think this matters. It would be important in ensuring America's leadership as the global leader in promoting innovation and sustainability and blue economy job creation while combating the climate crisis. I think its passage into law matters, and that is another reason that I'm here. So I want to just end, since I've gone way over my 4 to 5 minutes, sorry about that, and I've seen a little bit of nose picking. But I want to end simply by saying thank you. The fact that each of you have your oar in the water on these issues matters. The fact that each of you understand the importance of working collaboratively to address this crisis matters. The fact that each of you recognizes that while we've made progress in our nation's capital, that there's more that needs to be done, that matters. So please know how much I appreciate your engagement on these critical issues, and I invite you to count me as a partner. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Congressman Kilmer. Up next on the agenda, we actually have a series of virtual breakout sessions hosted by different partners, including Finless Foods, NOAA's National Ocean Service, NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, Oceana, and Environmental Defense Fund. If you are on the virtual platform, please make sure that you choose to join any of these sessions from our wonderful partners. If you're here in person, you can actually watch on the CHOW Ocean mobile app, which is available both on the Apple and the Google Store. So I want to thank you and thank the panel that we had for everything, as well as let you know the next plenary session that we'll have is going to take place here in this room at 1:15, if you can be back, and that is the session on adaptive fisheries management in the face of climate change. Thank you all.